What's the difference between movies in China and movies in America? Well, first, let's talk about movies in America. In America, you have this thing called the film industry, which is a catch-all term for a number of very large corporate entities who employ an innumerable number of people we call executives, who are individuals of dubious qualification who are nevertheless charged with the duty of predicting what audiences around the world want to see. And these people will levy significant capital, numbering in the ridiculous billions and billions of dollars, to engage in the production of what are presumably crowd pleasing pieces of content. Now, which means the goal of the motion picture industry in America is very, very clear, which is to milk you, the audience, for every penny that you have. Now, movies in China, you have that and more. The Chinese movie industry is also dominated by several large corporate entities whose primary goal is to milk you, the audience, for every penny that you've got. They are also responsible for conjuring up the capital of bringing these very presumably appealing pieces of content to life. You know, they pay for the actors, they pay for the actors' assistants, they pay for the actors' catering. They pay for all the things that need paying for. But on top of entertaining the public, bread and circuses, they also have a propaganda mandate from the lovely government of the People's Republic of China. Yay, workers' paradise. Now, to understand why this is, to understand how this sort of self-competing conflict of interest works and came to be, you need a little bit of a history lesson. See, now, movies in China are much like China itself. You go back far enough, say before the 1980s, China functioned as a what they call a planned economy. You ever hear your grandparents talk about the commies and how socialism is bad? Or not your grandparents, maybe just your garden variety Republican. Socialism is bad, but what is socialism? Well, socialism is the idea that everything belongs to everybody. Well, actually, that's not true. Everything belongs to everybody, but the government is in charge of making sure that everybody gets a fair share. And by their fair share, they mean an equal share. But that's impossible because human beings are not created equal. Some are tall, some are short, some are fat, some are not so fat. Some like salty things, some like spicy things. Some like red, some like blue. Everybody is different. But in socialist utopia, everybody needs the same thing and everybody wants the same thing. So the ideal way of making that happen is to make sure that the government gives you everything that you need. So back in before the 1980s, that's how movies were made in China. Movies weren't made because the market needed them. The movies weren't made because audiences wanted to see them. Movies were made because the government said they should be made because people should have movies. Now, before the 1980s, movies were made exclusively by state-owned production companies. Every province in China had one, and they had quotas. They had their own actors who were assigned to them. They had their own directors. They had their own actors. They had every possible department you could think of involved in making movies that were simply employees of said movie studios. And they would go about their business cranking out movies every year. And these movies primarily served a propaganda purpose, which is, motivating the public to serve the greater good, to make the workers' paradise a paradise for all workers. Good, solid, red socialist stuff. But all of this changed in the 1980s thanks to the eminent reformer, Mr. Deng Xiaoping, who decided that it was good to make money. And he was right on multiple accounts, but that's another story for another day. But basically, he reformed China and opened it up to free economy. So all of a sudden, you have this thing called private property and private enterprise. And starting in the 80s, private film companies appeared on the market and started making movies in competition with these state-owned studios. These state-owned studios were still around, but now they didn't have quotas anymore. They could make whatever they wanted, or whatever they put their mind to, or whatever they had their money for. Now, did this lead to a boom of filmmaking in China? It sort of did, but you probably haven't heard of many of these because of a very simple thing, which is there wasn't enough of a market. Before the mid 2000s, in fact, actually probably before the 2010s, the number of movie theaters in China were very, very limited. In fact, if you were outside any of the large major cities, and there's like four of them, you'd be lucky to find a cinema, quote unquote, a movie theater, which was more than just a VCR. Seriously, people paid money to go to places with televisions and VCRs. That's how broke everybody was. But, things eventually got moving well enough, and you got the first generation of famous Chinese filmmakers in around the 1990s. And these are people like Zhang Yimou, who made Hang High the Red Lantern, who made To Live, and you had people like Chen Kaige, who made Bye Bye My Concubine. This was all in the 90s, like the 8 ladies in the early 90s, because the free market had been working for long enough that certain filmmakers with unique voices could get movies made with a combination of state-owned enterprises and private industry contributing to their funds. Now, you probably haven't heard of these. You've probably, if you've seen any Chinese movie at all from the 90s, they're probably movies like Jackie Chan and Jet Li movies, and those are Hong Kong films. Now, remember, I am talking about the Chinese film industry, which is an entirely different thing from the Hong Kong film industry. Because if you recall, those of you who are knowledgeable enough, before 1997, Hong Kong was a colony belonging to the British Crown. It didn't come back into control of the Chinese government until 1997, and even then, there are two sets of laws. Even today, nominally, there are two sets of laws governing these two different territories. So before 1997, not only did Hong Kong run itself, its movie industry ran itself, and it's the people who made movies in Hong Kong made movies with a implicit understanding that nobody in mainland China was going to see it. It was going to be for Hong Kong, it was going to be for Taiwan, it was going to be for everybody else but mainland China. So they did things their own way. And the most significant aspect of doing things their own way, and the most significant difference between movies in mainland China and movies anywhere else, is censorship. Even with the advent of going to the movies as a mainstream form of entertainment that people went to the movies starting in, I want to say, the mid 2010s. Starting around 2013, 2014, things really started to get going because you had large, massive corporations, Wanda among them, who started to build movie theaters, which was not a thing they were allowed to do before. They started to build a lot of movie theaters. They started to invest heavily in film production, leading to a actually quite an unhealthy boom in movie making. Seriously, back in 2012, everybody and their mother was making a movie. There was this joke we used to make that freaking coal magnates from Shanxi were investing into movies. You had just an influx, a deluge, a cornucopia, a rainfall of movies being made, which was usually not great. Even though everybody was making money, people were making way too much money, and they were making way too many movies, and most of those movies were dog shit. But even during the heyday of Chinese filmmaking back in the 2010s, there was one thing that you couldn't get away from, and that was censorship. There's a whole government department in China dedicated to just that thing. I won't get into the process of how you talk to the censors. That's for another time, another place. But suffice to say, anything that you make in China that you intend to show to a paying audience, be it a TV show, a documentary, a feature film, an animated film, a cartoon, it has to go through censorship. You gotta get certified. Now, this is a government entity strictly dedicated to making sure that there's nothing in your film offensive to the ruling party's interests. Now, but this was before 2020. See, before 2020, censorship belonged to the Guangdian Zongju, SARFT. I think that's the acronym. And it used to be that they were around to make sure that there wasn't too much violence, that there wasn't explicit sexuality, and that there wasn't anything explicitly opposed to the rule of the Communist Party. That's, in the beginning, that's basically what they did. Now, as time went on, more and more rules were added to their no-no list. And some of them range from the fairly reasonable to the incredibly stupid. For example, starting in 2012, time travel was no longer permitted. because there was a wildly popular TV show centered around, actually two wildly popular TV shows centered around time traveling, and there was a concern that it would confuse school children about the nature of history. So, yeah, time travel is no longer allowed. No time travel movies in China. And, every year they add more rules onto it, usually triggered by some popular form of media, very often powered by quote unquote public opinion as voiced by the Karens of this world. There are Karens everywhere. But the Karens of this world have made making movies really difficult. And in addition to that, in 2020, the previously independent Film Bureau was rolled into, as part of a major government restructuring, rolled into the Central Ministry of Propaganda. At first, you think, oh, it's just like a government bureaucracy thing. So what? So, all right, it's still, they're still doing the same thing. They're not doing the same thing anymore. Because starting in 2020, said restructuring has taken censorship in China from, I'm just going to tell you what you're not allowed to show, to, I'm going to tell you what I want you to make movies about. That's right, starting in 2020, the Chinese film industry has essentially morphed into a privately funded, for-profit propaganda machine. You're still responsible for putting up your own cash, and you're still responsible for making money for your product, but we tell you what we want you to make. Every movie you make has to serve a specific propaganda purpose. That's why around the anniversary of the Korean War, there was 15 bajillion movies about the Korean War. And every other movie that wasn't about the Korean War got no theater space. In fact, these were movies that had negotiated specific distribution deals for specific numbers of seats and specific showings. Like that's part of what you do for distribution. Yeah, all that went out the window when the government said, no, we're going to show Korean War movies, and that's all we're going to show. And then starting this year with the, I think there's a concerted effort to warm relations between Beijing and Washington, or at least there's a concerted effort in Beijing to warm relations between Beijing and Washington. All of a sudden, no more Korean War movies. Even if you've already made them, tough shit, you're not getting your money back. So yeah, that's the difference between movies in China and movies in America. Movies in America have to make money, and movies in China have to make money, but also work for the government.